now introducing John Fitzgerald Johnson. Mr. Johnson is a veteran and ordained minister, and as an information technology architect, he supports Fortune 500 corporations nationwide with cutting-edge technology. Mr. Johnson is also a recording artist and activist, and he believes we are one nation and that only we can fix us. John Fitzgerald Johnson.
First, let me thank all of my esteemed colleagues who thought it not robbery to come here to Lake Charles, Louisiana, while the rest of the country is distracted by the circus that our political process has become. And I thank you all for taking the time out to come here. I truly mean that. I believe that the problem in this country is that those folks who are empowered to fix those problems that we are living through are not being afforded the opportunity to fix them. So when I say that only we can fix us, I am not talking about a selective demographic, that is someone that agrees with my ideals. I mean that all of us who make up the patchwork of America, irregardless of race, color, creed, religious background, persuasion, or sex, that unless we all come to the table and begin to hammer out, just as the founding fathers of this nation did, an agreeable platform, a course of action, deliverables, and a plan, that we are headed in a circle that has been repeated time and time again in multiple societies. Whether it has been my time on the battlefield, my time behind the pulpit, my time on stage making millions of dollars, my time sitting in corporate boardrooms with some of the biggest government contractors on the planet of the earth, or leading the Black Lives Matter movement with thousands of people behind me. I had to have the epiphany and the revelation that the only way that we are going to move forward is if one of us avails ourselves to the office of the presidency. And that is why I believe that only we can fix us. Thank you.
Mr. Johnson, your reason for running for president and what makes you the best candidate?
It would be remiss of me to continue and not allow someone who drove all the way from Los Angeles to be here tonight. Literally drove, didn't hop on a plane. Came here to be in the debate, and Assistant Candidate for the Green Party, who has just arrived, so I wanted to give her a chance to get in and get seated. Welcome. I'm glad you made it. To effect change, to combat the ills that are infecting this great nation of ours in so many ways, whether it's from the immigration problem that everyone tends to want to talk about, but nobody really wants to do anything about it. And some of these solutions that have been put forward are just downright ridiculous, if not almost reminiscent of what happened in Nazi Germany, all the way to dealing with some of the financial situations that have been perpetuated by the very financial structure that continues to profit off the back of the average American, to deal with some of the issues of police reform, to deal with some of the racial old wounds that have been reopened in this country. And in spite of all the prosperity that we have, yet we continue to have instances that show us that we've moved nowhere since the 60s. And to address some of the issues as we move further into longevity for those of us who are becoming seniors, to look at Social Security, to look at some of those ills that are plaguing the younger folks, student loan reform, but most importantly, to begin to utilize the resources of the United States, work across the aisles with all folks, irregardless of political persuasion, to reach consensus that the United States is already great, but just to take us into the next level of greatness. And that's why I'm running for president.
Mr. Johnson, what will make you effective as a leader for us?
And the qualities that make an effective leader are pretty cut and dry. The question is, does a person possess them? Of these that I'm going to talk about, I will talk about only the ones that I possess. The first one is, I understand the differences in different cultures. I have lived around the world. I spent 20 years in the military, and even now, I'm still employed around the world. The first thing that you have to have is the ability to understand cultural differences and realizing that just because something doesn't fit into your puzzle doesn't mean that there's something wrong with it. The other thing is that I have built into me a steadfast resolve to stick to my guns once we have arrived at a logical decision, and not to be wishy-washy about it, and owning that decision. Should it ever come into question later, whether it be by my constituents or by the very folks that are affected by it. Another thing that I possess that makes me a great leader is I possess the discipline, the logical thinking, the reasoning and thinking, and I'm open-minded at the same time to look at another person's perspective. I am not fixated on I'm always right. But if I have to go through a process that arrives at a logical conclusion, that's where we're going to go unless someone can present a more reasonable alternative. Understanding intent versus impact. That no matter what our intentions were, whether as a nation or as a person, you cannot control the impact that it has on another individual or a country. And if you don't understand that, you can blunder into military situations or blunder into economical disasters. That's another quality that I possess. And finally, I would say the ability to use diplomacy versus strong-arm tactics in the world and within this country. Those are the qualities that I possess that make me a great leader.
Mr. Johnson, what do you see as our nation's biggest problems with our schools, and what do you plan to do to make things better?
I've stated this on my platform. I'll state it here again, and I've heard this several times, but as your president, the first thing I would do is I would abolish Common Core, point blank period. We have to redefine the mission of the Department of Education. I would work along with them to redefine it. And we can start in a number of places. The restoring of funding for after-school programs, the restoring of programs that developed in the arts, as I've heard before, vocational music, things of those natures. Also, taking a hard look to abolish those systems that encourage the prison system to be profitable for those folks who flunk out or kicked out or simply pushed ahead and failed in the school system. Now that means that we're reducing the probability of moving numbers to schools based on tests. Also supplementing pay and funds to the state-run schools and the reduction of voucher programs that encourage folks to take their kids out of those schools. Also a reduction of what I call returning to revisionist history, which is being taught to children. Let's get back to the basics of teaching facts. And also, most importantly, giving them teaching tools that make these students valuable to the U.S. economy. Who cares if you can tell me about astronomical physics and engineering and whether or not black holes exist on the subliminal plane, but you can't balance a checkbook? Back to the basics.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Dionisio.
Ladies and gentlemen, on January 1st,
Mr. Johnson, your top 3 priorities.
My top 3 priorities upon entering the White House, as they say, a presidency is normally defined by the first 100 days. Believe it or not, as an independent, by virtue of the fact that I'm sitting in the White House, I guess my first action would be campaign reform and changing the rules so that folks like us who will come behind me will have the ability to also get to the White House. That will probably be the first thing I do day one when I sat down, and the abolishment of the Commission on Presidential Debates. Number 1. Number 2 is what actually spawned me in the first place, is an immediate addressing, whether it be through congressional action or through execution of presidential executive authority, police reform, outlawing racism. And when I say outlawing it, the same way they did it in Germany. When I lived in Germany, you could not talk about the Nazis. You could not display the swastika. You couldn't have a slur of that type. It was illegal. So we would have to make racism in this country, as it's being manifested, illegal. And if I have to use executive authority, I would do it. And then again, of course, another part of that would be the legalization of certain substances that would give us an immediate tax boom in this country, the same way that we lifted prohibition and turned it one of the most destructive drugs in this country and made a profit off of it. Immigration reform. You don't deport millions of people who are already here. You turn them into effective taxpayers.
Mr. Johnson, what action would you take, if any, on Obamacare?
Well, the Affordable Health Care Act, to tell you the truth, I wouldn't take any action against it. I think that it is actually President Obama's legacy, and it is something that they've been trying to do in this country for years. However, what I would do is the first thing I would do is I would begin to explore the impact of reducing the profits that Big Pharma makes off of drugs, the marketing of those drugs, and reducing the prices of those drugs. Because there wouldn't be a problem with Obamacare, or whatever you want to call it, if healthcare wasn't so expensive to start with, whether it be drugs or services. So there'd have to be some type of an exploratory committee to bring back that information so we could look at changing the regulatory laws to force the capping and the reduction of the prices of drugs and stop making the drug makers so profitable that we have to have these programs to start with. The other thing is not the touching of Obamacare, but the evolution into the universal health plan. The same way there are other countries where health care is provided to seniors, veterans, and so forth automatically, irregardless of some program or some rate that's actually been required of them. And last but not least, I would probably want to pursue a restructuring of the laws that govern the insurance agencies. So that those of us who are under certain federal programs, whether they be Medicare, Medicaid, and so forth, are not affected by the profit-making and price gouging that has become so prevalent in some of these major corporations. That is how I would respond to Obamacare.
Mr. Johnson, share with us your position on gun control.
As I've said many times on many broadcasts, my position on gun control has been stated clearly. I'll repeat it here. The Constitution of the United States was written so that if the government became tyrannical, that we could defend ourselves. So therefore, when it comes to the matter of controlling the weapons, I am not in favor of taking the weapons away from the average U.S. citizen. I am believing that how those guns are maintained. I do not support, as Mr. Barone has just said, the utilization of smart weapons, because if someone breaks in your house and you can't use the gun because it's coded for the person's hand who's not there, now I've got a dead spouse. So I do believe that the gun laws that are on the books need to be more enforced. I also believe that if you are not able to be properly trained on how to utilize certain firepower, then you cannot be licensed to own it. I believe that all weapons should be licensed no matter who owns them. I do not believe in a gun registry, but I do believe that certain firepower should not be in the hands of those who do not know how to effectively utilize it, be a custodian of it, and if you utilize that firepower in the defense of your home, your property, or your family, that federal law should first try to defend you before they try to convict you and try to paint you as being a rebel against the United States. I will not disarm the American people. I am a gun owner, I'm an avid shooter, and I'm a responsible gun owner, and I will not penalize responsible citizens for being responsible with their weapons.
As per our rules, because you referenced Mr. Thomas in your answer, Mr. Thomas will now get 30 seconds to respond.
Well, basically, that is incorrect. If you have a smart gun in your home, it can be registered to anybody in the house. In other words, it could work for the mother or the father in the house. So it's a smart gun. It can be programmed to work. The object of smart guns is to protect the community from someone that is out to do no good with a stolen gun. If it can't work, it can't harm anyone in the community.
Thank you. And now to Mr. Dionisio for his position on gun control.
I've been saying consistently for 10 years that we need common sense controls and not confiscation. Guns deter rape, robbery, and murder and terrorism. Anytime you're perceived to be more vulnerable, your probability of being attacked skyrockets. There's over 200,000 rapes that are obstructed and stopped because women own guns. I really am quite disturbed that the President of the United States and the media will use a child's death for emotional leverage to take away the right of American citizens to protect themselves. Smart gun technology will be implemented over a 5-year period first and then 10 years. There's some serious concerns. RDIF and fingerprinting is not consistent 70% of the time right now, and other technologies it doesn't work. Americans cannot be the guinea pigs. If someone comes into their home and they're not able to use the gun, that's a real problem. but for location purposes, it's an incredibly good idea. We need to embed chips into the handles so that we can locate after firing so they can't be thrown away. Authorization is really the issue when it comes to smart gun technology. And authorization also can be a real problem because if the person who authorizes it in there, you have to have sub-authorizations for the family. It goes on and on and on. I've been a testament to the fact that Washington, D.C. had the highest gun control laws in America and was sadly coined the murder capital of
And
America.
now we will begin with candidate Johnson for our next question. Please express to us your views on our present terrorism issues as related to our immigration issues affecting our country today.
Thank you, great question. There are two answers or two perspectives we have to take when we talk about terrorism. There is what we call global terrorism that I've heard spoken about at this table, where we're talking about people coming from other countries who, for whatever reason, decide to want to enact acts of terrorism within our borders. And then we have to acknowledge we have domestic terrorism. And domestic terrorism is most of the time swept under the rug as a lone shooter or a lone wolf, but we've got a problem overseas. As far as the immigration piece, I think that I would take that word and pack it up and put it in the parking lot, because it is not immigration that is tied into the terrorism, domestically or globally, that we're seeing. People who immigrate to this country, legally or illegally, have come here for opportunity. Or, if I would say, refugees are a different story. Those people coming out of war-torn situations globally, whether they're running from oppression, running from an implosion of their society, who come to the United States, sometimes bring those same ideals with them. And they may disagree with what happened at home, but they may really disagree with what's going on here. Not to mention, there are those undesirables who sneak in under the radar. I believe that this country should not only utilize its resources to, if it can, reasonably identify those terrorist aspects globally and prevent them from entering this country. However, in the face of a global catastrophe, where people are needing a place to stay, live, eat, and sleep, the United States should facilitate that in their neighborhood first, and if there is no neighborhood, provide them a shelter in this country. Then address its own internal domestic terrorism, whether it be at the hands of the police or individuals who become sensitized and identified with ISIS, ISIL, and other places like other people like that.
Thank you, candidate Johnson.
I have to agree with co-candidate Thomas that you have not worn the uniform. And I cannot allow you in good faith to be my commander-in-chief. If you've never been to war,
Stop it.
then you cannot command me. However, that is built into the presidency, and I'll say it here that all of the candidates that are running right now in the public sector, none of them have served in the military and have avoided military service, and so have their families. Yet they're quick to talk about boots on the ground. I have a problem with that. As far as those of us who are returning, to civilian life, as your president, I would enact a one-year health program for all service members returning. It is a mandatory program that we would not only, it's not the VA where you go and check it out and you go and find out, because I've been there, I've worked there, and I've been a patient there. And as one of the other candidates said, it's deplorable. The culture is horrible. This program would track you for 1 year to make sure that you receive the adequate mental and physical medical help that you deserve, free of charge. Going into these, and that goes to any hospital, not just the VA, and it would be exempt, funded by the government. VAs are staffed right now by folks who are on assignments for civil service. They're not staffed by real doctors who care. Those doors need to be open for those folks. Remove the VA from the civil service program, because most of those folks are sitting on time, regulatory oversight for benefit administration. And I want states to pick up the tab for National Guard service members returning, since we're now sending National Guards into combat.
That is your time. Thank you, sir.
So, do we get to respond to something as insulting as that?
He did not refer to you by name, therefore, as per our rules, there is no rebuttal. And now, candidate Johnson, your thoughts on the debt.
With regards to the national debt, Most of us forget that when we came into the Obama first administration, that we came into that administration in terrible shape. And by the end of his first administration, we had a surplus that was squandered by another political party whose name I shall not call.
Say their name.
As the president, we must work to control government spending on the programs, and I've heard fraud, waste, and abuse, and I agree.
Yeah.
But we should also enact a periodic program to review and target for elimination those programs that continue to fly under the radar and consume mass amounts of money without any question. While it's unrealistic to eliminate a national debt to zero, because that's part of working in a business, we can eliminate tax breaks for multinational corporations like GE that I worked for that made more money than God and paid zero in taxes. We also have to have the establishment of a federal intern to work program for college grads and for high school students, where I've seen them come into these corporations, intern, go to college with a guaranteed job when they came back in that particular discipline. And last but not least, we also would have to take a look at some of these free trade agreements that have been signed into practice. They're doing nothing more but driving us deeper into debt. As your president, that is how I would attack the national deficit. Thank you.
Johnson, thank you.
I
Candidate.
said it before, I'll say it again. Only we can fix us, period. And I think I speak for everyone up here when I say that. The United States is multicultural, multifaceted. We're a country of ideas and ideals that sometimes clash, but we always tend to work together to get through whatever is confronting us. And right now, what is confronting us is our very well-being. As your president, I would work along with anyone, reach any conclusion, strive to do whatever needs to be done to get the job done, so that we have a world that we can hand over to our children, that they can hand over to their children. As your candidate for presidency, if we could pull an upset to remove those folks who are in power right now who are professional politicians, then I would tell you that right now I would be the person that you should elect. OnlyWeCanFixUs.com, and I'm John Fitzgerald.
Candidate.